Hello YouTube. A while ago I was asked by a follower to do a video on reassembling the top of a Pentax. I haven't done it until now, so that's what I'm doing here tonight. For this video I picked out, well, it's a clunker. It's an old Pentax Spotmatic SP, and I'm just going to cover basics of reassembling the top cover on one of these. Most are similar, but they're all pretty much the same. So we're going to take the Spotmatic. Now on this one, actually on any of them, one thing you want to make sure before you put the top on, because I've done this 100 times, is make sure the release button is in place. Not all of them are captive. This one has a little keeper in it. A lot of the older ones and some of the newer ones don't have the keepers. And if you're working on perhaps a KM, there's a trim that goes along here. There's a trim piece that goes right along the front. It's a little plastic thingamajig, easy to forget. I've got a couple of KMs. I've taken them apart and put them back together again at least once and forgotten that little trim piece. So make sure your trim piece is there. Make sure your shutter release button is in place, and just slide the top on just like that. This one only has one screw in the end right there. Some have, like this one, this is a H3A, has two in the back and two on the top. This one only has the one. Some have a couple on top, none on the back. The bottom line being, if it's got screws in it, make sure and keep track of them. And some are size specific. Usually if there's a screw in the end here, it's typically bigger than the others, so you want to be aware of that. So I'm going to try and do this as much as possible in real time, so you can get a general idea of what a time investment it is, which is relatively small. This one has a washer, a wavy washer. It's indicator thingamajig, which has on it, the Pancro, empty, and color, I guess, or not, markings on it. I've never actually read up on those, so I don't know what they exactly mean. And you put on a little threaded hub. I'm going to be doing a bunch of this stuff. I know my hands are going to end up in the way, but I guarantee if you have any mechanical aptitude at all, you will be fine. And that spins on. It's a right-handed thread. Make sure it stays put like it's supposed to, and it does. And then open the back, hold the fork, and screw on the rewind knob. And just give it a little tweak. That's all it needs. And next would be the shutter speed selector array. And if you watch the other videos, you know you only have to take out the center screw and then take the whole assembly off as a single unit. I used to take them apart completely. There's 3 screws that hold this bottom plate in. I used to take those out. That's just not necessary. What is necessary is that you line up tabs and holes. There's a hole here, there's a tab here. You line up the tab with the hole, so that the tab, you can't see it, I'm sure, so that that tab fits into the hole. Then you put your spring in. Your spring is tapered, typically. Smaller at the top, bigger at the bottom. Larger portion goes down. And the next piece has your check the camera again. Has your ASA speeds on it, or ISO. And this too has a tab that also goes down into a little hole. So you line the tab up with the hole. Oops. Try to avoid that part. And you'll have to kind of feel around for it. Doing it by sight will only get you so far. There, I think that went in. And you'll probably wind up having to do this 2 or 3 times because it seems to me that there's always something interfering. And then you've got your actual shutter speed dial. Now this has an oblong hole in it, which corresponds to an oblong shoulder that it slides over. So you're either going to be dead on or 180 degrees off. Now it's unlikely you'll get it off, because I could put you like off the map for your shutter speeds. And to double check if you're in the right spot, crank it around to 1,000, because in between 1,000 and bulb there's a fairly long space, and as it turns out I'm off. So I'm going to turn it until I find that big long space, and I think that's it. That should be 1,000, and it just happens to be 180 degrees off. There's a potential thing that can happen. Alright, I'm going to stop here, just get this. Okay, so I got it back on there. So when your tabs are lined up, your holes are lined up, everything is lined up the way it's supposed to be, and you've got the proper spacing between bulb and 1,000, and your corresponding digits match up, you can check your work by pulling up that ring, turning it gently, and you should see the ISO numbers change smoothly. And when you release the ring, it should pop back down into its locked position. And from there, you take your center screw, and most of the time you can get them started with your finger, just like that. Give it a little twist, kind of like this, and then take your tools, right-handed thread, and give it a tweak, and you're done. Double check. Space between 1,000 and a bulb is correct. Turns nicely. Slide that ring up. My ISO speeds change properly. And we're ready to move on to the advanced lever. The advanced lever is where you're going to find the most differences from camera to camera. This one's pretty simple. The older ones have a ratcheting mechanism for the frame counter, and it's a little bit of a headache, but it's not real bad. Just take lots of pictures before and during taking it apart. That means when you take a cover off, make sure and take a picture of it before you pull anything else out. This, however, has just a disc, a plastic disc that goes down there. Some are white, some are black. You put the lever on, then you've got, this is a keeper ring. It's got raised areas, rounded raised areas, so it's shaped, kind of round. There's 3 low spots in the actual mechanism, and in the high spots here, I'm saying high, they're actually sticking out. there's a thin kerf in there that these tabs go into. So you set it down there with the tabs lined up with the low spots, and then you're going to want to take a pushing device, in this situation a screwdriver. Oops. Try not to use a magnetic screwdriver. You're going to turn that until those sticking out portions of those raised areas go underneath the tabs. And just nudge them until you get the thing where it needs to be. And that's so that the 3 holes line up with the 3 threaded holes below. Then you can take your teeny tiny little screws, set them in the hole. These are right-handed threads, and then screw it down. Okay, I'm going to stop here because you don't need to watch me. Okay, the screws are driven, and that's back together. Alright, so we've got our rewind, our speed knob, and advance lever. Now I'm going to take a little tray. I don't know what you call these parts, but this is the next piece in line. This also has an oblong hole that corresponds to an oblong shoulder. Just set it in there until it slips down onto its shoulder. Then it has a locking ring, locking nut. Oop. I don't remember. I think this is a left-handed thread. Okay, yep, that's a left-handed thread. Oops. And then tweak, and you're done. Make sure the camera's still running. And then your actual counter. Most of the ones I've taken apart have a brass washer that goes over this center part. This one does not. It just has the disc with its brass center. And there again, it's got an oblong hole that goes over an oblong shoulder. You want the 0 to be at about the 11 o'clock position, with the prominent dot before the 0 to be facing forward at the 12 o'clock position. And then you search longingly for the screw that isn't there. Okay, so as fate and fortune would have it, this screw is missing. I must have taken this thing apart at some other time, and when I put it back together again, never put the screw in or lost it or something because it's not here. So if I had the screw would go right there. I believe that that's a left-hand thread. You'd screw that down, and you would take the cover that goes over the counter, red dot forward. There's the red dot, and you take your little tiny teeny weeny screwdriver, make sure it's down all the way, and then screw in, oh boy, if you can see them, those little grub screws. This one is not down all the way. There. No space. You want to make sure that that's right down tight. And that's that. And that cover is replaced. Okay, next I want to show you the H3V. Essentially, it's the same. You might have a couple of screws here and there. Everything else is pretty much the same, except for the only real difference is your speed dial has no provision for ASA or ISO speed altering. So it's just a ring. It's held on by grub screws. You take it off, and that's that. Next dial is slightly different. I showed you this earlier. I forget if this one, I've had this one apart for quite a while. I don't remember if there's a nylon ring under here or not. If there is, keep track of it. The advanced lever goes on like that. It would have two screws that hold it down. Next, I have no idea what this is called. It's just the next piece in line. Oops. It's just the next piece in line. Goes on top. And when you install this, this has round hole flat on two sides. Only goes on one of two ways. This post goes through this hole. So you put that on there, you have to hold this arm back so it's behind the stud. Okay, if you can see that, that's where that arm is. Next comes this little ratchet. Again, I don't know what this is called. Round hole in the middle. Goes on there. The tab here has to be in front of that stud being on the advanced lever itself. Then you have the locking ring, which in this case is a right-handed thread. And it's a nuisance because you have to kind of pat your head and rub your stomach at the same time. It went on pretty nice that time. So you want to screw this down gently, making sure that this arm, because this ratchet fits around the circumference of the underside of this nut. So you want to snug that down like that. Make sure that ratchet can still turn freely. And then you have a gear. On the underside of that gear is a stud. Has to be down. So you hold this arm back. Again, hole in the middle, flat on two sides. I don't recall that positioning, because this positioning makes any difference, because this thing will turn completely around. And you want to make sure this arm is back so it can grab the teeth on that gear. So there you go. See that? If you can see it. That little arm is clicking its way around. And then over that would go, let's see, over that would go the actual counter. Again, hole in the middle, flat on two sides, so you can only be either exactly on or 180 off. And once you have that on there, all the stuff has to be down properly. And I'm really not doing it exactly right. In any event, that goes on there. You put it over the very tip of that shank. There's a screw that I don't have that goes in there, which is probably also right-handed thread. Cap goes over, and you tighten down the grub screws with the red arrow pointing forward. And that's how you do that one. And there's a couple of different variants. They're all more or less the same. Just take your time and take pictures.